Brent Pilgrim, welcome to the Preconstruction podcast.
Hey, Gareth.
You're sitting up there in Fort Collins, Colorado, and you're as happy. You look like a very happy man, Brent. It must be nice. Must be a nice lifestyle up there.
Oh, it's beautiful. We've got we're really on the front range of the Rocky Mountains, so about an hour away from getting really deep into the mountains. So if you need to scratch that itch, it's not too far away. But we're in a great place here, just north of Denver by about an hour or so.
Brilliant. And I know, and you know, Denver's booming, so it must be all good.
Yep.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you for making the time. Really, really appreciate it. You have been referred to me by numerous people. And listen, that's always a good thing. That's when people refer people for whatever reason. It's always because you're doing the right things and you're able to, I think, describe and break things down into layman terms. So I'm really looking forward to this. Just to give people a taste, National Director of Preconstruction for the Beck Group. Now, I'll let you elaborate on that. Give us an idea of responsibilities within that role or what you're trying to do right now.
Sure. So the Beck Group, as you know, is a design and construction firm. We call it an integrated firm. We're mostly down in the South. We have offices in the Carolinas, Florida, Georgia, Texas, and Denver. Colorado is really our westernmost and northernmost outpost, if you will. But because of that structure, we have our pre-construction teams are broken down into regional teams. And so each one of those are led by a regional director. So we created this position about a year ago now, a year and a couple of months. And my charge has really been to prepare Beck and prepare the pre-construction team to be prepared for this, what I'm calling the next generation pre-construction team. I mean, we all kind of have an idea of what's coming down the pipeline in terms of change, what the industry is going to have to do to react to that. So my charge has been, what can we do to prepare our teams to be positioned to respond to that?
Brilliant. And I'm going to dig deep into that. And that's what I love about someone like you. I talk about it all the time on the podcast. It's all about collaboration, sharing success stories, sharing failures so that we move forward as fast as we can and try and keep up with what's coming. And you mentioned there about creating and bringing in the next generation. Obviously, it looks very different. Give us an idea of where we've been, where we're at right now, and where you think it's going.
Yeah, the industry for a long time. So this is my 23rd year in the industry. I think I've got that right. And the industry for a long time has gotten by with the 30 plus year subject matter experts on estimating and pre-construction. And that has been good enough. But now we stand kind of at a pivot point, really, with I know you've talked about AI on your podcast, but really just thinking about technology in general. It's with great respect for my estimating colleagues that I really can't do what they do. They've got way more estimating experience than I do. I've got more pre-construction technology experience is what I would call it. So that's kind of my area of expertise. And so as we look to the next 10, 20 years, I look at our teams and say, man, with things like historical cost, with things like data analytics, with things like model-based estimating, which I know we'll talk about today, we've got to really look at how we're upskilling our teams, and that's me included, right? I mean, I'm not immune or automatically capable of handling what's coming down the pipeline. But we've got to be in tune with that, and we've got to be prepared to learn something new, and then pivot our skill sets and our talents and our capabilities to handle what's coming.
Brilliant. I love that. And that's a good build up to model. Now we're going to get into next generation and skills at the end, but that's a good build up into what you talked about, model based estimating. So for anybody, there's a wide variety of people that listen to this, from junior people, graduates, people in high school. Let's just break it down, simplify in layman's terms. What is model based estimating?
Okay. Well, I'm going to do this in two ways. So the first thing is I'm going to define model-based estimating, but then I'm going to tell you what I believe is the next generation, which is called integrated estimating. So model-based estimating is pretty simple. It's taking any kind of model that you've been provided and extracting whatever quantities you can from it. And the way I described that was intentional because I want it to feel like it's kind of an ad hoc process, right? You don't know what you're going to get with model-based estimating from the design team. It could be this really high quality model that's really well developed, or it could be a very poorly developed model that's lacking in quality. So I like to use the analogy of, you remember when you were a kid and you had the box of Legos and you went into the living room and dumped the Legos out on the floor, and that was your starting spot. Well, that's what it feels like a lot of times with model-based estimating, right? Each object, you just don't know what you're going to get in terms of data and properties and labeling and that kind of thing. So model-based estimating is what the industry, I believe, has been doing for the last, I kind of go back to 2006, 2008 as really when we started investigating model-based estimating in full. And as you know too, it really still hasn't taken on, it hasn't really been adopted yet in full. I remember at last year's Precon World Conference, we surveyed the audience, which is a smaller, subset of the industry, but still a valid data point. I think like 83% of the room said they're not doing model-based estimating full time yet. And so what that tells me is it prompts the question why. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, not everybody wants to come in and deal with that box of Legos. That's not necessarily a fun process to do. So we started developing this new workflow called integrated estimating, which I think is what we need to pivot to as an industry for when we start talking about model-based estimating. And I'd like us to make a distinction. And as an industry, when we're talking about it, I'd like us to make that distinction. Are we doing model-based estimating, which is simply pulling quantities from a model, or are we doing true integrated estimating, which has a whole set of characteristics that I can define for you to qualify it as well?
Yeah, that's a big question. That percentage, I'm surprised. I thought that would be higher. I mean, all day, every day with my bread and butter job within pre-construction and estimating and recruitment, I'm speaking with VPs, directors. I would say that's much higher. And I know you said it was a small pool, and even in advancing pre-construction, they were continuously doing polls during the sessions. So the fact that we're not even nowhere near model-based estimating, how difficult will it to look at those people and the people listening going, you know what, I'm not doing model right now, but this integrated stuff sounds good. Can they skip, or do they have to do a process and go and pull their hair out for 2 or 3 years doing model-based estimating?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a great setup, actually. So I would prefer that they skip the model-based estimating process.
I love it.
Right?
And I guarantee you everybody's delighted to hear that.
And the reason is because, again, let's go back to that talking point around what is the next generation like? We've got to start as an industry. I know this is a bad word, right? Standardization. But as an industry, we have got to start getting comfortable with and looking for ways to standardize the process. There's just no other path forward. And I think that's as sincere as I can get about that. So integrated estimating offers us a standardized approach to what we used to call model-based estimating. Okay. And the way it does that is it should make the process way more palatable to people. Because it's a structured process, it provides a much more leaner learning curve, right? It's not quite as steep as just, again, that box of Legos. And so what do I do? What do I do with this mess on the floor? So with integrated estimating, when you pull in a model, it's a known quantity. You should be able to know what to expect is coming into your pipeline, regardless of what tool you're using, regardless of whether you're using a symbol or estimator or whatever. And there are a handful of tools that can deal with this integrated estimating workflow. It is software agnostic. It's more about the characteristic of the workflow than it is the tool you're using. So I'll just jump in real quick if I can and say, what are the 5 things? So I've been talking about integrated estimating. What are the 5 things that characterize the integrated estimating workflow? So the first one is this idea that there's intentionality around the model authoring process. Now, whether you're doing that as a construction and pre-construction firm, you're developing your own cost model, which is a legit process in my mind, or you're getting a model from a design team. The point of that intentional model authoring is that the author of the model is doing things very intentionally. So for example, I'm going to create a mass model that captures the overall square footage of the project, right? So if I'm looking at an office tower, I'm looking at a school or whatever the building is, I'm going to create a mass model, and that stores my gross area calculation. In pre-construction and estimating, we lean on that gross area calculation for so many things. It ultimately becomes that the numerator for what is the cost per square foot value being calculated by. So it's important. And so the model then can become this single source of truth for collaboration between the design team and the pre-construction team in that sense. The second characteristic is that every object in the model, because it's been created with some intentionality, it can be quantified and it can be qualified. And so qualified means that I can find it in the model. I know where it is because it's been tied to some kind of a building system or a classification system. And the name of the object is intuitive. So when I look at, say, a CMU block wall, the model name, the model object name says something that tells me this is a block wall. And then the dimensional characteristics of that object that are usually parametric is the qualitative aspect or the quantitative aspect of it. So I can quantify the object from its own properties and information. The third characteristic of the integrated estimating workflow says that there must be a digital link between the model and the cost estimate. So for example, if I select in my estimate on a cost item, I must be able to trace back through this digital breadcrumb process. What am I tying that quantity to that's associated with that line item? This is really important from an integrity standpoint. You know, as I'm collaborating with my design team members, they need to be able to trust that the quantity I've got is accurate. And I didn't do any, you know, mistakes or errors as I'm transferring quantities from another. Let's say I use some kind of export tool to export quantities from a model, and then I manually apply those into my estimate. That's error prone, and that's not going to work. So and really that third characteristic, even though I described it third, is really the hinge point of the whole integrated estimating workflow. So regardless of what tool you're using, if you can't create that digital connection, you're not really doing integrated estimating in my mind. The fourth characteristic is this idea that we're going to begin to apply some kind of estimating standard to the estimating process. So for integrated estimating, what that means is that we're going to apply one of three quantification strategies to the model. Now we kind of get a 2-for-1 here. Number one, we're applying an estimating standard, but we're also, this standard allows us to back up in the design phase process. So oftentimes you'll hear with model-based estimating, well, we can't estimate from the model yet because it's not fully developed, right?
All the time.
I say, no. You ought to be able to use a model that's been developed around an LOD 200. If you're familiar with that, we can talk about that. A very conceptualized version of the model. We ought to be able to estimate from that using the standard. So the standard says that there are three ways to quantify scopes of work from the model. The first is model-based, a model-based strategy. And that's pretty obvious. It's like you've got an object in the model that is a virtual representation of the thing you're quantifying. So take a grade beam, for example, right? If a grade beam is modeled, well, you can quantify directly from that grade beam. It's a virtual representation. So I can pull a model-based quantity from that object. Model-informed is kind of the second category. Model-informed says that I've got an object in the model that is closely related to the scope of work I'm quantifying, but it may not be an exact virtual representation. So a great example of this would be in Revit, I might use a basic wall to create an exterior envelope object. And we know in reality that wall is going to be consisting of metal stud framing, some form of sheathing, some form of insulation, and then a finished material. But the model object isn't broken down to that level of granularity. It's a much higher level representation. But I can use that very object to inform the quantities of my estimate for all of those envelope materials, right? And that has a high degree of integrity. The third, and probably the most challenging one for people to understand, is this idea that we can infer quantities from the model. So model inferred is the third and final category. This is very applicable in the earlier stages of design and estimating, because oftentimes if we're working with a conceptual model, we're not going to have things like MEP systems very well defined, if at all. But what we do in pre-construction, we often say, well, I've got an office tower that's 200,000 square feet. So I'm going to initially estimate my MEP systems off of the gross square foot calculation. So I'm inferring a mechanical calculation off of the gross square footage of the building. So model-based, model-informed, and model-inferred, those start to create a language that we can use as estimators to say, here's how I'm quantifying this scope of work, even though the model isn't fully developed, right? And then the last characteristic is probably going to be the most important going forward, which is this idea that we can automate some part of the process, all or part of it. So for example, today Revit has a great change management interface, right? When you update a model, it presents you with this dashboard of green, red, and yellow. Here's the things that were added. Here's the things that were removed. Here's the things that were modified. And with the workflow, we can say, because we've got this digital link between cost item and object, when we do that update process, the applications are just transferring that knowledge over, right? They're transferring those links to the new model object. So that creates an automated update process. In the future, I think we'll see very soon this idea of being able to automatically price objects. We're already seeing that in 2D worlds, right? But I think we'll see that with 3D, where we can say, I've got a Revit content library as an example, and I have certain door objects defined. I've got certain slab objects defined. There is nothing preventing me today, except for the software code that needs to be developed, from saying, when you encounter this door type, when you encounter this slab family, I'll go ahead and automatically associate this cost item or this cost assembly with that. And what that does is, when we import the model into the estimate and we push that automatic pricing feature, boom, right? We've got 75% of the manual effort taken care of, and that allows us to really focus back now on the analytics and everything else. But that automation, that fifth characteristic, requires us to have some level of standardization in the process, because otherwise we're just dealing with that box of Legos, and there's not much we can do with that. So
yeah, I love it. I love the breakdown. It's incredibly simple. Don't get me wrong. It's quite complex as well, but it's simple and it's quantifiable, and it's in layman's terms. Now let's go back to the first point. So you've got the cost model. Who develops it? Who owns it? Who puts the data in? Where do you believe that and this is the ideal world, where do you believe that who's responsible for it and who should do the work?
Well, let's talk ideal state, which is future, and today, right? So ideal future state, obviously, man, as an industry, if we're not all hoping that we can collaborate with our design partners, I mean, for Beck, it's an easier model when we're doing the same project that we're designing, right? But even for third-party work, who in this industry doesn't want to achieve an opportunity where we're working directly with the design team and they're sharing their model in real time, and we're talking the same language. We know what state of development it is. We're not expecting things that don't need to be there and in schematic design to be there. We're all working together off of this single source of truth. That's the ideal state. If we're not all thinking about that and wanting that, well, I'm not sure we're really aligned then, in terms of where we want to go as an industry. But today, what can we do today? So how many companies do you talk to build their own models for things like clash detection and coordination? A lot.
Yeah,
right?
a lot, right?
A lot.
And absolutely. But I want to start just quickly while you're mid-flow. Not enough.
Fair enough.
Honestly, I cannot believe it. Honestly, I can't. And that comes back to the 83%. They don't see the value, and it doesn't sit in the Precon division. It doesn't sit within that team. So to me, it's a lot of outsourcing. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's a great point. I'm glad you pointed that out, because I would love to see us do more of that. You're right. The model becomes a tool for us to do our jobs really, really well. And back in the early teens, so 2010, we used to say, well, we don't get paid enough to do that, or and the ones that were doing it because they got the value out of it anyway, right? So I use that analogy today to say all of these companies that are willing to build their own models for constructability analysis, for clash detection and coordination, because they see the value, they should be prepared to start building cost models for cost estimating purposes today, because there's value in doing that. I'm going to say something that's kind of cliche and old. There is something that the model conveys in terms of information and comprehension and communicability that just 2D documents will never achieve. We all know that. We know that intuitively. We've experienced it before.
We're all visual. We are all visual. I think there's some weird stat. Over 65% of the world are visual. They take in information through visual. But you think as well, and I'm just going to quickly pivot towards the recruitment and retention and training people. Sure. Everybody keeps telling me, I don't want anybody unless they've been on the field. They got to have operations background. They got to have experience. And that's okay. In an ideal world, fantastic. Yeah. But the amount of jobs and the way Precon is changing, we have got to get around that. I think model-based visualization is the way we use that as well, as a recruitment
Right.
tool, as a training tool, as a development tool.
Absolutely.
So that's a wee pivot towards it. But sorry, I interrupted you
Well,
there.
can I speak to that? So, other professions are using models as training tools, right? I mean, the medical profession, they do virtual reality simulations for surgery, and they study the body with models and all of that kind of stuff. So why would we not, right? I have had kind of an ongoing conversation with one of my team members who's more of a junior team member, and they like to tell the story themselves of where when they started working with models, they started getting a more fuller picture of what the estimating process looks like. Now, not at a granular level of detail, mind you, that's obvious, right? But they got to see the whole project and understand, well, when we look at structural systems, what are we talking about? When we look at the envelope system, what are we talking about? Versus coming in right out of school and saying, hey, I need you to go take off these doors.
Yeah.
And just going down into this really granular level of detail, right? And missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, but the granular, you touched on it earlier when you're going through the five stages. The granular level is coming, like it's going to be there. They're going to be able to click on it. They're going to break down that wall, and they're going to see the stud wall. They're going to see the plasterboard, whatever the facade is. So it is coming, and you're right. I mean, to me, it's going to be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So if we're building these to tie this back to your point, if we're building these models, if we're willing to entertain that as a way of doing our job, so cost estimating estimating the project, quantifying and estimating it, we can also turn around and use that model to teach our junior members about the building process. What do foundation systems look like? You may not have experience out in the field, and that's okay. One of my goals at Beck is to start developing, we call them trade codes. So, what level of employee are you? By trade code, I'm starting to develop a training system that says, regardless of whether you're, whatever your vertical specialty is, you're going to kind of have the same level of knowledge, industry knowledge, because we're going to expose you to concepts. We're going to expose you. That's the word, right? We're going to expose you. You're not going to become a subject matter expert, but we're going to expose you to concepts that you may not have the opportunity to get because not everybody may be able to go out through the field and be on a project in the real world. So.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to tie this quickly to MEP. MEP is probably between 35% and 50% of cost of projects.
Right.
And yet half of the estimating world and estimators don't know anything about it. They pass it off to some MEP expert within the company that is going to retire in 5 or 10 years. When he walks out that door, it is going to be bedlam within that pre-construction department. So that's a perfect example of exposing people to MEP. And anybody listening with 1, 2, 3, 10 years experience within pre-construction and estimating that wants to climb the corporate ladder and wants to get better at their job, go and get exposure to MEP. 100% right. Let's discuss the one thing that you said about the third thing, which is the most important thing, the digital link. How... To me, it sounds like, and this is high level stuff. To me, it sounds simple. You've got the model, you click on the thing, and it brings you to the numbers. One of the big thing about pre-construction and estimating to owners and clients is being able to tell the story about where the numbers come from. This digital link is surely the answer to helping people do that.
Yeah, I really think so, and that's why I think it's the most important factor of the 5. So we didn't talk about my history, but real quick, just going back, I dove into the pre-construction technology world around 2006 with Stuart, and that's how I met Stuart. I started working with our product called Destiny Profiler, which back in its day was a early version of model-based estimating. Really the earliest version of integrated estimating, because it was an all-in-one platform. You created the model, you tied cost to it inside the same platform. And what I learned from that process, so I did that from, say, 2006 to 2016, and did a lot of cost consulting services using that. And what I learned from using the Profiler platform was that visual intelligence, the ability to convey cost information visually, was far and away superior to sliding a spreadsheet across the table to your client and saying, here's the cost of your project
with a load of numbers on it. I love it.
Yeah, right. And it made it so much more fun too, because you could engage a client. You could see them consuming the information visually. As I got this model up on the screen, and I'm working through the different building systems, and I'm talking them through, well, here's how I approach the foundation system. Here's how I approach the superstructure. Here's how we approached MEP. And it's just, it's worlds away from being able to comprehend and communicate costs. So I'm right there with you on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we're sort of laughing here now, right, about the idea of doing that. Me and you both know it's happening way more than people think and people believe, and it's still
Right.
happening. And there's a huge amount of trust involved in that, and also risk on the contractor side. So if we can don't keep the trust, but mitigate the risk and the costs, and be more reduce costs and build it quicker is the
Right.
ideal. So
Definitely.
that's and then the last point is the automation side of things, the AI side of things. Let's dive into that now. Listen, it's at the tip of everyone's tongue. We've had a few people on talking about it.
Yeah.
It's here. I think we talked about it before pre-recording. It's here, and it's going to be here quicker than everyone thinks. It's not a case of, oh, AI, I'll look at that in 12 months, or I'll look at that in 16 months and 24 months. I've got all this important stuff to do first.
Right.
It's here, and
Right.
it's coming fast.
Yeah. Well, the AI topic, there are way more subject matter experts than I on this topic. But what I'll share with you are some opinions that I've started to form on this. And one of the things around AI, that topic that I'll just be honest, concerns me is, am I investing all this time in developing this integrated estimating workflow only to see it supplanted by AI in a few years' time, right? And what I mean by that is AI is really intelligent from a process standpoint and from a learning model standpoint. So let's go back to the Legos example, right? AI ought to be able to take that box of Legos that you dumped out on the carpet, scan the images of the sizes and shapes of the model, scan the properties of each object, and start to organize that into a coherent model on its own based on machine learning concepts, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's totally doable. I know that's just a conceptual idea, but that's totally achievable today if we had the right parts and pieces in place. So one question I have as I'm developing this workflow is this all for naught? Like, do we really need to do all this? And I think we do, because so the answer to my own question is, I think we do. I think the process, the AI will be better at its process if we are giving it data that's gone through some level of standardization, consistency, some concept of data governance, guiding your principles and guiding your direction and that kind of thing. But yeah.
I totally agree. I totally agree. AI is going to be really powerful when used properly with the right information and the right guidance. And forget about AI. I talk about it all the time. The talent with the technology equals success, and AI is within that technology, and it will be integrated into the technology. And I think we think that the person is going to have to use AI. AI is going to be in the technology that we're using. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's Agreed. Essentially it. There's going to be other tasks that AI is going to help us with, like documents, legal side, but that's all. It's not Precon, if you ask me.
Right.
Good, and I love that. Now let's move to the final one. You are in charge of developing the standardization, what a Precon team looks like within the Beck Group. What's it going to look like now? I mean, how I see it, and I'm working with clients that are looking for data engineers. They're not looking for pre-construction professionals. They're not looking for estimators. They're looking for data engineers to help them with the data, data scientists. That's where it's going. Is a Precon team going to be made up of designers, BIM VDC, data engineers, data scientists, pre-construction managers, estimators? What's the dream team going to look like?
That's a softball question for me. So again, we didn't talk too much about my past, but I started out in construction, moved into architecture, then moved into technology. So my initial career was all around cross-disciplinary training, right? I wanted to learn as much as I could about the different disciplines. And being at a firm like Beck, where we had in-house design, in-house construction, it was important to me that I got a piece of the pie and I understood a little bit about everything. Well, pre-construction, so one thing that our team hears me say today is pre-construction at Beck is really the third and co-equal leg of our stool, right? We've got design and construction, and we've got pre-construction. And it really is a third and co-equal leg of the team, because we are that bridge that can help design team from the very beginning, but also parlay all that information, make sure it transfers over to the construction process very seamlessly and smoothly. So what that means to me from a skill set standpoint is we need people on our pre-construction team that understand inherently about design. Now they may or may not be good designers. That's an irrelevant question. But do they understand design? Do they understand basic design principles? Have they worked either long enough with design teams so that they're starting to pick up the language and they understand the nature behind the design process? Or did they go to school and get a degree in architecture, but they didn't want to practice architecture? So this idea of cross-training and cross-disciplinary experience is foundational. And so to your point, man, I'd love to build a team that's got, I'd love to build a team where our virtual design and construction team and pre-construction team, there is no dividing line. They are basically the same group, right? Our VDC brothers and sisters in our company have strong technical skill sets that we can learn from. And they have that visual, because they're steeped in models every day. They've got that visual ability and that model capability to bring to us. And I think they're capable of learning the estimating process as well. So the future pre-construction team to me is a cross-trained, cross-disciplinary group of subject matter experts who can start when the client knocks on the door. Our design team member may be the first to answer the door, but we're walking down the hallway right behind them, coming up to greet the owner and saying, let us help you bring your idea to fruition. And then carrying that concept all the way to our construction team, and maybe even walking with them a little bit out onto the project, helping the job get bought out, working with our subcontractors and our trade partners to get the project aligned for success, and then supporting them as they head out into the field. So
I love it. And you know what I love as well, Brent, about the BIM VDC side? It's been going for 20 plus years, right? You know what they're very good at? They're incredible at helping people. They help each other as an industry, like is unseen. Like they put free stuff up on YouTube. There's loads of stuff out there on BIM and VDC. And I'm surprised it hasn't gotten further quicker because of that. And if they can bring that, even that little small skill set in, and people look at them and go, wow, you're so good at sharing and helping and advising on what worked and what doesn't work. So if they can bring that into Precon, and I agree with you, it's all got to be integrated. But it's interesting that you say as well, and you are in a unique position with Beck Group. We had Burns and McDonald, the National Director of Preconstruction, on yesterday. I think you know him. He's in another unique position. He's got engineering, he's got construction, and he's got architecture. Very similar, but people don't have that. So I think that they need to start thinking about that, about hiring a designer within the Precon team, the VDC BIM person within the Precon team, and then someone from the field. I mean, surely that's the 4 or 5, the dream team.
Oh, definitely. And I would be remiss if I didn't even acknowledge that our pre-construction team today does have several mechanical, electrical engineers on staff, and some people have come from the trade industry and come into our team with electrical experience. So I agree with you. I echo that sentiment. It's really important that we build a very well-rounded. If nobody else on the team is as well-rounded as we are, that makes perfect sense to me. So
brilliant. And I want to touch on something we discussed before, is the analytical thinking of a Precon team, how that will change now that we've got this technology, this innovation, this model-based integrated system.
Yeah. Well, the data analytics piece is really the piece that we're all dealing with it now, with historical costs, platforms, and trying to understand tools like Power BI and things like that. So bringing someone onto the team that has a analytics capability is important, but everybody on the team now has to start learning this idea of looking through an analytical lens. And so when they look at data, right? So estimators historically have been very good with detailed information, understanding numbers inside and out. Okay, that's great. That's awesome. That's a skill set they bring to the table. But then let's broaden that analytical lens to now start to look at data across the project holistically. And what I mean by that is, it's not just about the cost. It's about ratios, efficiencies. Skin to floor ratios are important. Gross to net ratios are important. looking at historical values of systems is important. So there's a whole other level that maybe we tiptoed around and dealt with a little bit when we had to in the past, but today this is going to become part of the pre-construction process, and really being able to tell an owner, here's why your building costs what it costs, and here's what you're going to have to do in order to get it into the green area of your pro forma, so to speak, right?
Brilliant. And Brent, that comes back to what you just said, and I know it was ideal what you described, but the pre-construction person going in with a designer at the very beginning, but more importantly, is going through the operations, the buyout, even through the RFPs, any RFPs, right? RFPs, right. How much did it cost? Why did it happen? You learn, you throw the data Absolutely. Back through the flow, the 360 flow, and we all learn and we understand it. And then there's a story as well to go back and learn and develop people further on, because I think there's a shift, and I said this 5 years ago when we started our firm. The reason we started is I thought there was a ratio shift. The amount of pre-construction professionals that a GC will need is far greater than what they've got right now. And what will happen is they will increase the pre-con team with VDC, designers, electrical, mechanical, trade person, and the operations team will shrink a little bit, because and as you say, some of the pre-con team will go on and deliver that.
Yeah. Well, what I would like to see us do is be comfortable growing our pre-construction teams a little bit more right now, with the expectation that with some of the standardization, some of these workflow improvements, some of the technological improvements, we're going to be able to do things more efficiently. So what I think is ultimately we may see growth right now in the size of our teams, but I don't think the future 10-year projection is a 1-to-1 ratio of growth of right. So we're going to kind of grow to prepare our pre-construction teams today, but then we're going to start to maybe grow at a different pace than what we will what we'll need to do to respond to the growth in volume, if that makes sense.
100% agree, and that's fine as well. You're going to have to suck it up for a while, but to suck it up for a while, you know what we need to do? We need to get all the owners in a room and tell them no more free con. And we got to start charging for it. We can't see, because you know yourself, a president, a CEO that's come from operations, it's old school. He's turning around and going, I ain't getting any ROI on that 100K salary of a designer. So that's going to be difficult to think.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and easy to say, hard to do, but we've got to start focusing as an industry on getting owners to see the value of pre-construction, and having that pre-construction professional walk in behind the design team member when they go to answer the door, and then having them on out on the project as the job's getting bought out and starting to get built, I think will showcase the value that we're providing to the client, and that'll help tell that story of there's a value here that you historically haven't paid for. But today it's going to have to be a value add that you pay for, because we can't afford to do it without it. So
yeah, and I'm just thinking out loud. Surely that then they become the single point of contact for the client, and that person has the majority of the information from the beginning to the end. Because I'm sure there must be real difficulty in a client being handed off to a project manager, a senior project manager, a director of operations, and him talk about almost how he's going to do it and not understanding what's gone before him.
Right. Well, at Beck, we have a position called the Integrated Project Leader, IPL. And I have often said that in the early days of a project, the senior pre-construction professional needs to be able to be that IPL. But I also would agree with you that there's nothing wrong in my mind with saying that a pre-construction professional could be that IPL throughout. Right now, it's a numbers game. We don't have that kind of number. We don't have those numbers to support that process for all our integrated jobs. But the concept I can definitely get behind. Pre-construction professional being the common thread from the beginning to the end.
Love it. My God, we could talk all day, Brent. Well, the good news is Brent is going to be at Precon World. We're going to give it a massive plug. Obviously, Beck Tech are running it. Stuart will be there. The whole team will be there. But it's about getting in a room, being collaborative, and getting solutions out there. I know you spoke at it last year. I wasn't there. This will be my first year. What can people expect?
Oh, it's a lot of fun. And yes, I agree. I think this is a key component going forward. We've done this for years, and I think those that have been to pre-construction focused conferences get a lot out of it, right? Just meeting each other, knowing we're all dealing with the same kind of issues and challenges, and making friends across companies and the industry is a huge deal. The Precon World Conference in October that Beck Tech puts on is a lot of fun. It's obviously more focused on Beck Tech's customer base. That's generally who's going to probably be coming, although that's not all who comes. And you get to hear about what your other companies, your competitors are using the product, how they're using it, how are they innovating with the product, what are they doing that might be beneficial to our process. And there's a part of me, Gareth, that Peter Beck instilled in me a long time ago, which is one of the reasons I joined Beck, was we want to help change the industry, right? So the things we create, like the integrated estimating workflow, we don't want to keep that to ourselves. We want to share that with everybody. The rising tide lifts all boats, right? Let's let the competitiveness come down to something other than workflows and technical capability, right?
I love it. I love it. Sharing, that's what it's about.
Definitely.
Brent, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth.